great talent wins games. Great stories win hearts. How did a World Cup winner and the Premier League's assist king in 2015-16 become football's most misunderstood outcast? This is the untold story of Mesut Özil, Arsenal's magician whose vision once lit stadiums, then dimmed under politics, perception, and power. At his peak, Mesut Özil turned passing into poetry, angles only he could see, weight only he could feel. In 2015-16, he laid on 19 assists in the Premier League, a total that put him within touching distance of Thierry Henry's all-time mark, and crowned him the division's chief creator. To some, he was the last great number 10 of the modern game. To others, a luxury artist in an unforgiving, pressing-heavy era. But the Özil story refuses to sit neatly inside a highlight reel. In July 2018, days after a bruising World Cup, he walked away from the German national team citing racism and disrespect, an earthquake that rippled through German football and politics. A year later, his social media posts condemning the persecution of Uyghur Muslims saw China's state broadcaster pull an Arsenal match from its schedule, thrusting him into a geopolitical storm far beyond the touchline. And by October 2020, he was omitted from Arsenal's registered squads, exiled from the pitch at a club where he had once been the face of a new era. These moments didn't just change how people talked about Mesut Özil, they changed how he was allowed to play. This film makes a simple claim. Mesut Özil was not merely a luxury, he was a lens. Through it, we'll see how genius becomes misunderstood, how soft-spoken conviction collides with hard power, and how a number 10's artistry can be celebrated into a brand, then weaponized into a burden. The stakes are his legacy, magician or myth, outcast or icon.
Mesut Özil's story begins in Gelsenkirchen, a Ruhr city built on coal and hard-won wages. In the crowded courtyards and fenced asphalt cages of its working-class neighborhoods, the son of Turkish immigrants learned a language that needed no translation. The ball did the talking. He was small, quiet, and observant, always scanning, always 2 passes ahead. While other kids chased touches, Özil studied angles, where a defender's hips were pointing, how a teammate's stride would open a passing lane half a second later, how the weight of a through ball could turn a sprint into a stroll across the goal mouth. Life at home was modest, the kind that pays attention to the price of bread and the thickness of winter coats. Football wasn't a hobby, it was a plan. After school, he disappeared into the steel fences of the local cage pitches, places designed to compress time and space until decisions became instincts. In that pressurized laboratory, he learned to disguise intention, show one way, pass the other, lure pressure, release at the final heartbeat. The street hardened him without hardening his touch. What separated him even then wasn't pace or power, it was perception. Teachers noticed he rarely raised his voice, coaches noticed he rarely lost the ball. He spent hours shaping his first touch so the second could be a pass, not a recovery. The idols on his bedroom walls were playmakers, artists who slowed the world to their tempo. In a football culture that often celebrated volume, Özil cultivated silence. A steady head, soft hands on the ball, and an almost spiritual patience before the killer pass. By his mid-teens, local coaches knew they were looking at something rare. The boy who seemed to fade into the background between touches suddenly lit up a game with one slide rule delivery. Trials followed, structure replaced asphalt. The cage gave way to systems, schedules, and sharper expectations. Yet the essentials traveled with him: the economy of movement, the surgical disguise, the refusal to panic. He wasn't built to bulldoze through defenders. He was built to make them move first.
The academy gates opened at Schalke 04, and a quiet teenager with street-honed vision stepped into professional air. By 2006, Mesut Özil had been fast-tracked from youth ranks to the first team, given minutes in a side dreaming of titles, yet carrying the politics and pressures of a club forever chasing the next step. His touch was velvet, his weight of pass uncanny, but contract tensions with Schalke's hierarchy soon reshaped the pathway. In January 2008, at 19, Özil left his hometown club for Werder Bremen, a winter switch that felt like a gamble to some, but to him read like opportunity. Bremen gave him both structure and responsibility. The green shirt came with the number 11 and a license to create, and within weeks he scored his first Bundesliga goal, an arrowed finish against Karlsruhe on 26 April 2008, signposting a playmaker learning to decide games, not just decorate them. The 2008-9 season hardened that promise. Bremen struggled in the league, but Özil's creativity cut through the gloom. Double-digit assists, a growing reputation for final third clarity, and, most memorably, silverware delivered with his own boot. In Berlin's Olympiastadion on 30th May 2009, he ghosted into space and slotted the winner past Bayer Leverkusen to lift the DFB Pokal. 10 days earlier, he had tasted European heartbreak as Shakhtar Donetsk edged Bremen in the last ever UEFA Cup final. The domestic cup became both a solve and a statement that the kid from Gelsenkirchen could carry a team on a big night. If Germany hadn't already circled his name, the summer of 2009 made it bold. At the UEFA European Under-21 Championship in Sweden, Özil orchestrated the final against England with the calm of a veteran, laying on chances, scoring himself, and walking away as the match's outstanding figure in a 4-0 win. That night didn't merely burnish a resume, it announced a conductor ready for the biggest stage. Back in Bremen for 2009-10, he stepped into the playmaker's throne vacated by Diego and made it his own. More goals, more threaded passes, more headlines about a vision that seemed to slow time. By spring, scouts and superclubs were no longer visiting, they were negotiating. The 2010 World Cup would expand the audience for his gifts, but the decision had already formed in boardrooms. A pastor with this clarity, this economy, belongs in a jersey heavy with expectation. On 17th August 2010, Real Madrid made it official. Bremen agreed to a deal widely reported at around 15 million euros, and Özil walked into the Bernabeu spotlight as the rare signing whose game was built not on volume, but on the silence between touches. He had left Schalke as a prodigy navigating politics. He arrived in Madrid as a playmaker ready to translate imagination into trophies.
Transfer deadline day 2 September 2013. After years of being called a selling club, Arsenal detonated the window with a single signature. Mesut Özil, fresh from 3 seasons of serial creation at Real Madrid, signed a long-term deal for a club record fee, widely reported at £42.5 million. It wasn't just a transaction. It was a manifesto that the Emirates era could be about ambition again. The impact was instant and cinematic. 12 days later, at the Stadium of Light, Özil's first Premier League touch in Arsenal colours killed a long pass stone dead. His second slid a pass into Olivier Giroud's stride. 11 minutes into his debut, the record signing had his first assist, and a febrile fanbase exhaled. This was what a true number 10 looked like in HD. Even neutral match reports agreed. He made an impressive start, the kind that recalibrates a team's ceiling. What Özil offered was more than numbers. He altered the tempo of Arsenal's attacks. Wide players ran 1 yard earlier because the ball would arrive half a second sooner. Fullbacks overlapped with more conviction because the disguise on his through balls bought them time. For a squad bruised by departures, Henry, Fabregas, Van Persie, his arrival was a cultural turning point. As one analysis put it that week, he was a zeitgeist signing, proof that Arsenal could attract and build around prime talent again. The first season transformed belief into a medal. The Premier League title would belong elsewhere, but the drought that stalked the club ended under the Wembley Arch. On 17 May 2014, Arsenal came from 0-2 down to beat Hull City 3-2 after extra time and lift the FA Cup, their first major trophy in 9 years. Özil started, threaded patterns, and walked off in extra time with the job effectively done. The long wait was over, the narrative turned. Year 2 was more human. A stop-start autumn and an injury layoff reminded everyone that artists are still athletes, that rhythm must be rebuilt. Yet the outlines of a new Arsenal were forming. Alexis Sanchez arrived to add incision. Aaron Ramsey's timing from midfield synced with Özil's geometry. and a front three's diagonal runs became more dangerous because of the pass before the pass, the manipulation before the incision. The metrics still liked him, the eye test adored him. And behind the curtain, the work never changed. First touch as the prelude, head scanning before the ball arrived, economy over excess. But for all that, peak is a different animal. Peak is not promise fulfilled, it is promise stretched to the edge of what a league can measure. In 2015-16, Özil would drag chance creation into the mainstream vocabulary, finish with 19 Premier League assists, one shy of Thierry Henry's all-time mark, and spend half a season on pace to obliterate it. He turned possession into prophecy. He made the final ball a moral question for defenders. Step and you're gone, sit and you're split. The arc from deadline day shock to Wembley relief had done its work. Arsenal had a creator who could both change moods and change matches. The stage lights were now blinding, the expectations exacting, and ahead lay a 9-month thesis on what a modern number 10 could be in a pressing league that insisted the role was dying. He had revived a club's self-image and bent a league's record to his will. So how did the final inches to immortality become the first inches towards misunderstanding?
Mesut Özil's peak is a season-length masterclass in how a single player can bend a league's rhythm. 2015-16 wasn't simply about a big number, 19 Premier League assists. It was about a way of seeing football that felt old and new at once. In an era sprinting toward pressing traps and transitional chaos, Arsenal suddenly had a conductor who preferred to slow the room, dim the noise, and slip the knife between two heartbeats. The anatomy of those 19 assists reveals a pattern. Most were not Hollywood crosses lashed in from the touchline. They were scalpel passes played between center back and fullback, or disguised squares laid perfectly into a striker's stride. A typical Özil assist didn't explode, it arrived. One touch to prepare, one to show the defender a lie, and then the truth, rolled at the exact speed that allowed Olivier Giroud to finish in rhythm, or invited Alexis Sanchez to attack the blind shoulder. Arsenal under Arsene Wenger had always loved geometry. With Özil at full clarity, geometry became inevitability. Key to the illusion was his pre-assist movement. Watch him 5 seconds before the highlight. The constant scanning, the little pauses that make defenders compute the wrong solution, the way he floats just outside a marker's peripheral vision. The pass only works because of the silence before it. That's why teammates trusted runs that normal passers can't see. That's why fullbacks overlapped half a second earlier. That's why time seemed to dilate around him. If you want to understand Özil's peak, don't start with the pass. Start with the breath he takes before receiving the ball. Numbers, though, gave the artistry teeth. He led the league for chances created, and for a long winter, it felt inevitable he would erase Thierry Henry's record of 20 assists. By December, commentators were measuring his year not against midfielders, but against history. Henry's record had stood as a monument to dominance. Özil stalked it with delicacy, with the kind of understatement that made you check the scoreboard twice. The story of his season reached across screens and pubs. Could a quiet stylist and an increasingly industrial league set the new standard for creativity? That chase taught something else about the nature of assists. They are a two-person stat. When Giroud's finishing cooled and Arsenal's chance conversion dipped, Özil's pace slowed with it. Not because the vision dimmed, but because the final blade didn't land. Yet the chance creation never stopped. Match after match, he threaded runners through the same doors. Sometimes they walked in, sometimes they tripped at the threshold. The lesson was blunt and a little cruel. Even a genius passer is hostage to the shot. For fans who looked beyond the box score, the respect deepened. For critics who equated output with effort, the old caricature sharpened. At his best in that campaign, Özil made the Emirates hum at a different frequency. There were nights when the entire stadium seemed to lean forward every time he drifted into the right half space, because everyone, opponents included, felt what was coming and still couldn't stop it. He mastered the pass that sprinted slowly, the ball releasing so late that defenders had already chosen a fate, then moving so surely that the outcome felt predetermined. Teammates learned to trust his shoulder fate as a signal. If he looked left, the dagger was coming right. If he let the ball roll across his body, the fullback could book his overlap without looking up. Peak form also clarified his reputation paradox. The same languid body language that disguised intention read to some as detachment. When he floated rather than grappled, when he chose angles over duels, the lazy tag revived. Never mind that his pressing triggers were by design. Never mind that he saved energy for the decisive touches. For the believers, he was the last great classic number 10, proving that subtlety still wins. For the skeptics, he was a luxury artist flattered by highlights and protected by a manager who believed in freedom. In truth, he was both an artist and a system. A player's value spiked when the team's runs were rehearsed, and his magic receded when structure around him frayed. The internal dynamics were just as interesting. Alexis brought incision and gravity, Ramsey's third-man run synced beautifully with Özil's timing, even Theo Walcott's straight-line speed became a canvas for curved passes that died perfectly in the channel. When Santi Cazorla dropped out injured, build-up changed and Özil's receiving zones shifted a few meters higher and wider. He adapted, but the chain reaction was real. The closer he started to the final third, the fewer touches he got in the setup phase where he could stack advantages before the killer ball. Peak Özil wasn't merely a final action merchant. He was often the architect of the final action 2 passes early. By spring, the record still hovered, then slipped away. He finished 1 shy of immortality, tied to a line that made headlines but not history. The nuance is that he set a different kind of mark, an almost meditative ceiling for chance creation, a season in which he normalized the outrageous. If you watched only the montage, you saw grace. If you watched every minute, you saw control, of tempo, of shape, of the space between center backs that felt too small for a ball to pass through until, somehow, it did. But what happens when the passes keep arriving and the world stops listening? When politics climbs the touchline, when managers change, when patience for artisans thins in a league that worships the sprint? That question turns a peak into a hinge. Because the next chapters of Mesut Özil's story aren't about what his left foot could do, they're about who was willing to receive it, on and off the pitch.
The hinge of Mesut Özil's story isn't a tackle or a torn muscle. It's a collision between a soft-spoken artist and a world that suddenly demanded noise. The slide began quietly, in late Wenger years, and accelerated under Unai Emery. Tactical reshuffles, questions about intensity off the ball, flashes of brilliance punctured by long absences from the 11. What had once felt like freedom for a classic number 10 started to look under new eyes like a liability in a league tilting toward pressing and vertical sprints. The debate widened from form to philosophy. Do you build a system to protect genius, or do you ask genius to survive the system? Then football's lines blurred with politics. In 2018, the photo with Turkey's president Recep Tayyip Erdogan detonated into a national argument in Germany. After a bruising World Cup, Özil released a statement resigning from the national team, describing how he felt treated as German when we win and immigrant when we lose. For a player whose identity and game were built on synthesis, German schooling, Turkish heritage, street football elegance, academy precision, the split cut deep. The decision didn't just end international caps, it reframed his public image. To some, he was principled, to others, polarizing. Either way, the noise grew louder than the passes. A year later, he aimed that voice at a different power. His posts condemning the persecution of Uyghur Muslims thrust him into a geopolitical crossfire. A broadcaster in China dropped an Arsenal match, online platforms scrubbed his presence from certain games. The club distanced itself with boilerplate statements, and the gap between player and institution widened. In a sport that sells global harmony, one midfielder had discovered the edges of the map. Back at Arsenal, Mikel Arteta arrived with clarity and a new vocabulary, distances, triggers, compactness. For a few weeks, Özil was back in the picture, then the 2020 pandemic shutdown rewired the season, and after the restart, he did not play another minute. By October, he was left out of both the Premier League and Europa League squads. He responded with an open letter about loyalty and love for the club, offered to cover the wages of the club's beloved mascot during cost-cutting, and kept training alone while match days passed him by. There are many ways to be dropped from a team. Being unregistered is the coldest. It wasn't just that he couldn't find a place in the 11, he no longer existed on the team sheet. For his critics, this was confirmation. The modern game had outgrown a luxury number 10. For his supporters, it was a misreading and a mismanagement, a system unwilling to bend a few meters to accommodate a once-in-a-generation passer. The truth as usual lived somewhere uncomfortable. Ozil's gifts were still surgical, the collective demands had become industrial. He could still shape a game when the pieces around him clicked. When they didn't, the same body language that disguised intention read to impatient eyes like detachment. January 2021 opened a new door. Arsenal terminated his contract, he signed for Fenerbahce, a move wrapped in romance and expectation. The homecoming glitter didn't last long. Injuries, form, and internal discipline issues frayed it. A 2022 switch to Istanbul Başakşehir offered a final attempt to find rhythm, but the back pain that had shadowed him grew louder than the noise that once surrounded him. In March 2023, he called time on a professional career that had spanned Schalke Steel, Madrid Glow, North London Theatres, and Istanbul Light. Setbacks had not broken his talent, they had outlasted its platform. Yet even in exile, you could still see the outlines. The stillness before the pass, the half smile after it landed, a player who always preferred the quiet part of the game. The question now was what the quiet would mean for his legacy.
Mesut Özil's legacy is a paradox that football will debate for years. The last great classic number 10 in a game that was sprinting away from classic number 10s. At Arsenal, he became both mirror and muse, reflecting a club's longing for artistry while inspiring a standard for chance creation that shaped how supporters judged attackers around him. The 2014 FA Cup ended a drought and rewired belief. The 2015-16 campaign redrew the map for what creative output could mean in England. Even the criticism became part of the myth. If a player can divide so sharply, it's usually because he stands for something larger than results. With Germany, his arc bends from integration symbol to World Cup winner to a lightning rod for identity politics. Strip away the noise and the football remains. A midfielder who made movement meaningful, who proved that timing and touch can cut as deep as pace and power. If many remember the photograph or the statement, just as many remember the weight of a pass that seemed to stop time. Özil also leaves a softer imprint, a public figure comfortable using his platform for causes he cared about, a teammate widely admired for quiet generosity, a professional who treated scanning and stillness as a craft. Young playmakers study his pauses the way strikers study finishing drills. He didn't chase chaos, he choreographed calm. How will he be remembered? As Arsenal's magician, as a World Cup winner, as a misunderstood genius. But perhaps the truest epitaph is simpler. He changed how a crowd holds its breath. The half second before a pass that everyone knows of coming and no one can stop.
Great talent wins games. Great stories win hearts. If Mesut Özil's journey moved you, tap subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our next Premier League Untold story. Drop a comment. Was Özil a magician or misunderstood? Tell us your favorite Özil assist, the match and the minute. And share this video with an Arsenal friend who still remembers the weight of his passes. The untold story of Robin van Persie, from Arsenal's Flying Dutchman to United's title savior. See you there.